Today, we're diving into the incredibly complex balancing act happening in Algeria. It's a nation built on immense oil and gas wealth, but that same wealth has to pay for huge social promises made to its people. And now, they're looking at a completely new kind of energy future.
So let's get right into it with this question because it really gets to the heart of Algeria's entire modern story. It's a real high-wire act with massive consequences for millions of people, and it all starts with what's buried deep underground.
To really get Algeria, you first have to understand its engine, and that engine is hydrocarbons. We're talking oil and gas. That revenue is the absolute lifeblood of the state. It funds pretty much everything. But here's the thing. This engine has two very, very different speeds.
What's so fascinating here is that this chart basically shows two different economies inside one country. On one side, you've got the non-oil part of the economy, and it's actually growing pretty well, thanks to government investment. But then you look at the all-important hydrocarbon sector, and it can just suddenly shrink, like it did in 2024. That one number exposes a huge vulnerability.
So the bottom line is, being this dependent on one thing is incredibly risky. The entire national budget is basically at the mercy of the wild swings in global energy markets. A price crash, a new global policy, even a major climate event, any of it can send shockwaves through the whole country. And this economic reality has created a really unique social contract in Algeria. For decades, the state has basically used all this oil and gas money to make a fundamental promise to its citizens.
And that promise is a big deal. It means things like free healthcare for everyone and an education system that's seen enrollment skyrocket since independence. But maybe the most visible, and definitely one of the most expensive parts of this whole deal, is the massive system of subsidies.
And this chart just perfectly shows you the mind-boggling scale of the spending. I mean, look at that number. Nearly $24 billion in just 1 year on subsidies. And the breakdown is even crazier. A staggering 85% of that money went to keeping energy prices super low for Algerians.
Okay, but a model that's built on a shaky resource and incredibly expensive promises, well, it's starting to show some serious cracks. Both economically and socially, the math is just getting harder and harder to make work.
From an economic standpoint, it's a classic squeeze. Think about it. When energy prices fall, the government's income just plummets. But the spending on all those investments and subsidies, that stays high. And when that happens, you get a massive budget deficit, which puts the whole system under a ton of pressure.
Now, on the social side, here's another huge piece of the puzzle. A massive chunk of the workforce, we're talking 42%, works off the books in the informal economy. This means they often get all the benefits, like super cheap gas, but they aren't paying into the social insurance systems that are supposed to help fund everything. It creates this huge imbalance in the system.
And let's just go back to those energy subsidies for a second. To give you a real sense of how generous we're talking about, the price that people in Algeria pay for natural gas is about 30 times lower than the price the country could get for it on the export market. That is an enormous amount of potential income that's just being left on the table.
But here's the real kicker with these universal subsidies. They're not targeted. And as organizations like the IMF have pointed out, this means that wealthier households, the ones with more cars, bigger houses, and just higher consumption in general, they actually end up getting the biggest benefit. It's a really expensive and inefficient way to try and help the poor. And what's really fascinating is that the Algerian public seems to totally get this. A survey showed that a clear majority of people actually believe these subsidies should not be going to the wealthy, so it seems like there might just be public support for making a change. And it's not just the subsidies. The official social safety net has other pretty big holes. Coverage for self-employed people is low, some of the cash benefits are so small they barely make a difference, and a lot of essential medicines aren't fully paid for, which leaves people with huge bills. So all of this brings Algeria to this critical crossroads. The old model is clearly under a lot of strain, so the country is starting to look to a new horizon, one that's powered not just by what's buried under the sand, but what's shining down from above it, the sun. Experts point to a pretty clear path forward. Yeah, you need to broaden the tax base and reform subsidies, but the absolute key is to diversify the economy. And this is where Algeria's incredible potential for renewable energy comes into play. We're talking about massive, ambitious projects like the South H2 corridor, a planned pipeline to send green hydrogen to Europe. This could be a total game changer, fundamentally shifting the country's economic engine away from hydrocarbons. Now, for their part, the Algerian authorities, they see these challenges. They agree that things like subsidies need to be reformed, but they're also stressing the need to be cautious. And that same caution applies to this big green energy transition. You can't pull off these huge projects without stability and very careful planning, so you don't disrupt the whole social fabric.
And so that's where we end up, with this central dilemma. This isn't just about balancing a budget. This is about potentially trading the old economic engine that built the entire nation for a new, unproven one. How Algeria answers this question will decide if it can build a sustainable, green future while still keeping the promises it made to its people.